Okay. Hello, everybody. I don't know if you've heard of me or not, but I was the old school hacker back in the early 70s, where my claim to fame was using the Captain Crunch whistle to make free phone calls. This is a Captain Crunch whistle right here. And you glue up one of the holes like so, and you blow the whistle like this, and that whistle is the pitch-controlled, the AT&T telephone switching system. To make a call, let's see if I want to dial 234, and then I would just dial the numbers by repeatedly blowing the whistle that many times, and then that would make a free call. You would do that by calling an information number or an 800 toll-free number and blow the whistle in, and you hear a little chirp sound, and that indicates to you that you are actually connected to an internal trunk line that is a raw trunk line. This trunk line is not the same kind of line you as a subscriber would use. This line is nothing more than an internal trunk line. It's like getting root access to the phone system. Now I'm going to give you guys a little history about hacking, starting from an old school elder like myself, because I grew up, there were no personal computers. Back in the day, there was the IBM 360, and my exposure to IBM 360 was programming in Fortran using batch cards. And I'd have to wait about 3 hours to find the result of my program run, and more than likely I'd find a mistake and forget a semicolon at the end of a statement or something, and I'd have to resubmit the batch again and wait another 3 hours. Well, that really kind of sucked. So the other systems, of course, are Ultrix and DEC. Ultrix is a form of Unix, and DEC is the PDP-8 and the PDP-11 at the time, and they offered time-sharing services. There also used to be a company called TYME Share, which also were used back in the day. The very first viruses were probably in the early 60s. The virus was nothing more than a little thing that come out, little display that come on the screen and say, "I am a virus, catch me if you can." And the purpose of trying to solve the problem is try to identify where that virus comes from. And that was a challenge for hackers. Let me talk a little bit about hacking, what the definition of hacking is. Hacking is not accessing a computer system illegally and hacking passwords. Hacking started a long time ago when a program was modified to do one particular function. But what you did was you would then take this program and hack it into different little pieces, recombine them and re-put them together into another program that either can make this program perform better or do something totally, completely different. So only large universities would have computers back in the day. So if you were a student, and if you were taking the right kind of courses, and if you had a cool instructor, your instructor would probably give you an account on your college computer back in the day. Then came mini computers. Typical costs of mini computers is anywhere between $75,000 and $500,000, depending. Most universities have them. Large companies would have them. The exception was Alex Kamrat. He happened to have a BTI in his garage running an HP 2100 mini computer, and it could only run BASIC. Cost was $120K. It had 16 ports, teletype ports on it, and it only ran BASIC. A lot of pranks occurred back in the day too, where people would write programs to do strange things and to confuse the instructor. And some of these pranks we'll talk a little bit about maybe later. The Stanford AI Lab had a Blue Box program. This is a program that generates the multi-frequency tones, not unlike what the 2600 whistle did, that allowed you to be able to combine 2 out of 6 tones to create and to form a phone number that would allow you to be able to have an opening tone, the number, and closing tone. Now, when you're accessing the telephone company at the trunk level, you have got either 3 digits, 4 digits, 5 digits, 7 digits, 9 digits, and 10 digits. And so you had to have a way of telling when you were done dialing the number. So you had to have an opening tone, the number, and closing tone. The Alto system in the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center had a lot of basic stuff, and in fact, that's where the Mac graphic user interface came from, was the Altos computer that was created at the Xerox Research Center. Phone phreaking 101. What is a phone phreak? A phone phreak is a person usually blind because the only thing that's in their lives are audio and what they can hear. They've got exceptionally good hearing. By hearing the clicks and the whistles and the pops and all this stuff in the background, they can detect what we can't do, okay? And that's why they can do what they can do. Because they were able to dial a number, and just by listening, we're able to hear the little multi-frequency tones in the background so faint the normal person can't hear it. And they figured out that there had to be a way to do that. So after doing a little bit of social engineering at the telephone company office, they would have the ability to figure out what those frequencies were, and then they associated those frequencies with keys on an organ. And then to dial a number, they just simply played 2 notes at a time in different combinations to make the number. And this is how the costs of phone calls have gone way, way down. Back in the day, to make a long distance, they used to advertise, make a 3-minute call for $1 in the U.S., and that was a big thing that AT&T kind of bragged about. And so calls were typically around 35 cents a minute back in the day. And now, you know, a few cents a minute to make a phone call is what you can do now. So, you know, this is amazing how the cost of calls have really gone down. Some of the methods that the old school phreakers use, one of them is called the mute box. And what the mute box does, it takes a 2.7K resistor in series with the phone line, so that when the phone call comes in, you had a little button, you push the button really fast, and that would stop the ringing tone, but still leave the connection open. But it wouldn't be enough current to cause the telephone to go off hook. So therefore, the billing equipment wouldn't trigger. This allows you to be able to receive freight calls for free to the person that's calling you. So a person that's calling you will not get billed for it. Why? Because you're not picking up the phone. You are basically leaving the phone on hook, okay, but you're listening to the audio, because the audio still can go through that 2.7K resistor through the phone line. The next thing, which is a very useful number, are called loop-around numbers. Loop-around numbers in the San Jose area always began with 0044 and 0045. If you dial the 0044 side, you get a high-pitched tone. It's a 1,000 hertz tone interrupted every 10 seconds. If somebody else were to call the 0045 side, the two of them can get connected together and they could talk. Very useful when you want to kind of mask who your phone number was. In fact, that was how I actually got a hold of Denny. He gave me a loop-around number. I go call the operator, and she said, "That's an internal test number. Why should you be calling that number?" He called me back about a month later and explained to me what loop-arounds were. And I had to find out more, so I made arrangements to meet Denny, and that was when I first learned all about how blue boxes worked. The other thing are demonstrators. Back in the day, the telephones were rotary dial. So they had to have a way of demonstrating how the new touch tone system would work. So what they did was you dialed a 7-digit number, and it would answer with a dial tone. And then you could then use your touch tone phone right next to that phone to show how fast you can dial a number. These are called demonstrator lines. Normally, these demonstrator lines are restricted to only local calls. The other way phone phreaks got used were party lines, 2 different kinds of party lines. One of them is if you call a busy number, like a radio station, you could actually talk between the busy beeps. And so you can give enough information out to get them to call you or something. It's not very good to hear that constant beep all the time. Other phone phreaks figured out that if you opened up the sleeve on an old step office, you could actually have a 10-party conference line. If you could take a bank of 10 numbers that aren't used, and you open up the sleeves in the wires, then you could actually make a conference call. And usually that took social engineering, because you had to call the telephone company switch office, and you have to convince the guy that it's cool to bend the sleeve open and make it work. Okay, then there are blue boxes. Blue boxes is a multi-frequency device. It combines different tones. There are 700 hertz, 900 hertz, 1100 hertz, 1500 hertz, and 1700 hertz. They're odd frequencies because that way they won't intermod with each other and interfere with each other. It's quite a bit different than touch tones. Okay, then there are red boxes. Red boxes are the boxes used for making free calls from payphones. All it does is just emulate the sound that operator hears with money going into the phone. Now, they have the old 3-coin, the 3-coin payphones, and you put in a nickel, it goes ding. You put in a quarter, it goes ding ding. I'm sorry, a dime, ding ding, and a quarter gong. And that's the operator here, so that's why she knows that you're putting money in the phone. There's actually a demonstration number in Vancouver, Canada. It's a recording, and you dial 604-1121, and it goes 5 cents, ding, 10 cents, ding, ding, quarter, gong. And it just repeats over and over again. It's like an operator training tape. And these are some of the really cool things that we found in kind of exploring the system. It wasn't the idea of making free calls. It was the idea of hacking into the system. And that's what made it really exciting. So why phone phreaking works. Well, AT&T's decision to use what are called in-band signaling was their downfall. Very bad idea. Because if you can use in-band signaling and signal on the same wire pair that you're talking on, my God, that's like giving away the jewels to your system. It's like giving you root access to your computer. It's not a very good idea. So using this in-band signaling was the 2600 hertz that I just showed you with the Captain Crunch whistle by pulse dialing. And Joe Engressia was the first phone phreak to actually use his mouth, not a Captain Crunch whistle, just his mouth, to whistle a free call. Joe Engressia's more recent name is Joey Bubbles. He has since passed away several years ago, but he was one of the very first phone phreaks. Now, there's going to be a book out by Phil Lapsley called Phone Phreaking, and it's going to be coming out in the next few months, so be on the lookout for it. What you can do with this power, you can do anything an operator can do plus more. You can tap phone lines, you can access inter-trucking routing codes, you can reach inward operators. These are operators in distant cities, like if I want to call New Jersey, let's say Newark, New Jersey, I call 201-121, and then 201 is the area code for New Jersey, 121 is the inward operator for New Jersey. She'll answer the phone, New Jersey, and usually these operators will just connect you without any questions asked, because in order for you to actually reach that operator, you had to be an operator yourself. So these inter-trunking routing codes always were 3 codes. Like in the 209 area code, there's about 3 different cities. There's Stockton, there's Modesto, and there's a few other cities. So Stockton would be like 042. It's like you're going out, and 209's the area code, so you dial 209-042-121 or 209-044-121 to get into the adjacent city. And that's how you can reach inward operators. You can manually route the calls by stacking those numbers together. So you can do 209-042-044, 042-044, 042-044, and you can keep looping around over and over and over again, and that's how you can stack tandems. So in the early days of computing, now let's go back a little bit to computing. Back in the mid-60s and late 70s, there was the ARPANET. The ARPANET was the military's way of getting access to computers during wartime when all the universities and stuff like that all had their computers tied together on what are called TIPs, terminal input processors. And those TIPs allowed you to be able to access computers from different colleges and universities. MIT had one, Stanford had one, and all these large universities have their own computers. And back in the day, every ARPANET host had a guest account. And you could go in, you could run programs like chess programs, the Greenblatt chess programs. One time I took MIT with 2 terminals. I pitted MIT against Stanford in a game of chess. So I would duplicate the move that MIT made over to Stanford, and then Stanford made a move, I would duplicate that over to there. By the way, MIT won. Most hosts had, on those guest accounts, they had just very little storage, enough storage for you to maybe run and test a few programs. Most allowed you to play computer games. and offering academic-related programs, for instance, to help you with your math and something like that. And it was called the Gentleman's System, okay? Back in the day, normally nobody had computer terminals. And it was just, if you happened to have a computer room in a college or something like that, you could get on the ARPANET and you could dial a local ARPA tip, dial L space 39 and log, and you'll get another prompt, and that prompt is MIT, or whatever it happens to be, depending on the code. Now let's come bring ourselves to the early 1980s. In the early 1980s, DC Hayes came out with the first consumer product modem. It was 1200 baud, and this modem would basically allow you to access computers remotely through a phone line by calling up the phone number. You get the high-pitched screech, you get connected to the computer. Normally, BBS systems were used at that point. FidoNet was one of the more popular BBS systems, written by Tom Jennings. I see Tom quite a bit in the clubs in LA scene, by the way. He's still around. And so he's not very active anymore in the computing industry. He's getting on in his age like me. And so a lot of illegal hacking methods were discussed at this time. So back in the BBS systems, they'd publish usernames and passwords. And one of the most famous one was the 8BBS. 8BBS stands for PDP-8. BBS is a bulletin board system running on a PDP-8 system. The owner of that thing was called Bernard Klatt. He got busted and for running his PDP-8 BBS system. And of course, you can have more than one user on these on the PDP-8. You can only have one user on your Apple or on your Atari or your Windows or whatever you happen to be running. Online systems. Back in the day, there was CompuServe. They were the most expensive. I think they were like $12 an hour back in the day. There was another system called Bix. For about 3 months, they had free accounts. You could just give yourself a free account on Bix, and off you go. And then they started charging about $5 an hour after that, and their usage dropped from amazing down to about 1/100th of what they were using before. There was Delphi, and another online system which is very, very popular called the WELL. WELL stands for Whole Earth Electronic Link. These are the people with Stuart Brand. Stuart Brand and a lot of the people down in the Palo Alto area came out with a book called What Do You Do After You Hit Return? A very popular book for beginning students. And there was AOL, and of course there's many others. So now at this point, I think I'm going to leave it open for questions right now, and then bring in my associate, who we're going to show you guys a video of a zero-day attack. So if you guys have any questions now you want to ask me, this would be a good time to do it, and I could probably get ready and show this video at this point. If not, I'll just start the video. Now the video here I have right now is a video of a zero-day attack. I haven't tested the sound yet, so I might have a few difficulties. Usually it always happens, doesn't it?
Okay, test. Okay. So in this video, I'm trying to explain, first, my name is Benjamin Myrie. I'm coming from Germany, and I'm the founder of Vulnerability Labs, which is a European zero-day exploitation portal. We're releasing vulnerabilities in security surveillance products, Skype, for example, and we also released in the last months the MSN reset password issue. So in my video, I'm trying to explain how to bypass, for example, the firewall of the Barracuda system, which is actually upgrading monthly their input filters after we discovering vulnerabilities to them. So they also have a nice bug bounty program, which allows you to earn money by discovering the issues. So for example, what I'm doing here is to try to check out first the client-side validation of the specific system. So it's the Barracuda SSL VPN, which allows you to, which is an appliance model, which is used by very big companies, yeah, to allow VPN connections and stuff like this. What I'm actually doing here is I'm testing the client-side request of the specific folder which is executing out of the context. So this, for example, is a part of a client-side injection to the VPN firewall system. So like you can see on the right side, I'm marking the code which is getting executed out of the specific content. So yeah, watch the description of it. It's a double dash, which allows you, for example, so to bypass this firewall, I first included some frames. So the frames getting blocked after they upgraded their input filters. So what I'm trying to do is, I'm actually including a file which is bound to a specific name. And in the moment when it's getting client-side requested from the URL which is included and bound to the specific file, it's getting server-side. So when I try to implement, for example, a specific folder, I'm checking for the URL which is opening the URL request, which is later listing the shared folders inside of the application system. So what I did now is, the specific filter of the Barracuda firewall, this allows you to, for example, create a folder which has a double dash. So the exception handling told me on exploitation, you could not include your name for the specific folder because there's a double dash inside. So a lot of attacks getting blocked by these double dash because you need them to execute specific context. So what I did is, I bound this specific file, like you can see it in the URL, yeah? The URL is getting client-side requested from the specific website, which means I could change the website to any name, yeah, but it's not executing because the specific filter of the Barracuda SSL VPN is not executing the context, which you can see. So what I'm actually doing now is I'm including the specific file and saving this configuration without a double dash to execute this specific code, which is getting later executed on server side, also application side, you call it. So like you can see now, I'm changing and watching if the context is getting executed on client side. But it's not getting executed, so I try to bind it with a specific folder. And in the moment when you bind it with a specific folder, it's later getting executed out of the context from the application, which makes it damn dangerous because every person could, for example, later include, which has, for example, a privileged account and has access to the specific folder. He can execute code which lets you escalate out of this specific role you have, because you can do, for example, cross-site scripting. You can include a different kind of script code injections. You can also include malware, which is getting loaded when the person which has administrative rights is watching this specific list, which is happen very often. So, like you see, I'm checking the exception handling of the specific application. Until now, it's not getting executed. So I'm getting step by step near this specific function by checking the exception handling for the specific errors I'm getting by the application. Like you can see, for example, the code is not getting executed in the exception handling because I've discovered this bug 3 months ago, and they patched it. So I tried to check to figure out how to execute this specific code. So I watched the specific URL, which is implementing the folder. So I'm including my specific script code on the client-side request, which is implementing the script code tag like you can see on the path. And then I bind it with a file, and then it's getting executed out of the security appliance. So this vulnerability has been discovered to Barracuda about 2 weeks ago. And till now I have released about 20 vulnerabilities in Barracuda products, including the web filter, the firewall, the different kind of appliances they provide. So every time when I'm going into and checking the specific input validation, they try to upgrade it. So I ever need to find a new way to break this specific validation of the system to getting my code executed. And to do it 10 times after each other, when they see what you're doing, it's very hard. So in this scenario, I'm binding the file with the code, and it's getting executed persistent out of the application system when you're watching the listing. Means I'm the administrator, he's the user, he's implementing the persistent code. Yeah? I'm watching the shared folders, and the code is getting executed and is, for example, infecting me or he get my cookies or shit like this, you know. It doesn't matter what you're really doing, because the trick is to bypass the input validation of the specific firewall or web filter. Because for me personally, it's much more interesting to bypass a filter, like you can see it in the source code, yeah, than, for example, to only infect somebody or stuff like that. So, yeah, this was the Barracuda vulnerability, the O-Day one. So you can switch to the SonicWall one. It's also very interesting. Yes. Yeah. So SonicWall is a very famous vendor for firewall products and other security products. I have released in the last year about 10, 12 vulnerabilities to SonicWall regarding firewall products, regarding the surveillance and security products, and ever I need to find a new way to bypass these specific techniques, because the vendor also learn from the issues I'm sending to him. So if we see can easily execute code, he's trying to block it by, for example, blocking the frames. So if he's blocking frames, I try to make any other content inside, like I'm trying to make an onload or an onload alert, which, for example, executing persistent code. So in this scenario, I had access to the specific demo system of SonicWall. And this is the email security appliance, which is very important for big companies, because it's protecting your emails, yeah? So nobody can read it, it's getting filtered, spam filter, everything is inside of this application. So, yeah, switch a bit. It needs a bit till I'm accessing it because of the website. Yeah. Okay, wait a second. I will switch over. So the SonicWall firewall is not that hard, like, for example, the Barracuda products, because Barracuda is much more interested in fixing them very, very fast. So they also have an own bug bounty program which shows they care about their customers. That doesn't mean, for example, SonicWall does not care about, but Barracuda is definitely more active, and you can see that on the different websites they provide. So what I'm trying here is, I'm watching the application and try to find a possibility to execute out of the specific security appliance the code, which is bypassing the firewall. So I'm checking out a specific thread which is getting executed. So now I'm checking the virus function, which is listing at the end the output folders. And there's a specific flow in the thread folder function, which will be shown in some seconds. So what I'm trying to do is to check out the input validation of the specific application, and they patched some of the last issues I've sent it. So I'm trying to reproduce them, but it's not working. So I need to enable this function, which is later getting executed. You see it, I included the specific script code to the thread function. And you see it's executing out of the specific exception handling of the application, which means the vulnerability is not only in the thread folder from the past, it's also included anywhere where you can, for example, list a specific file, which makes this damn critical to your security appliance. So, like you can see here, the code is getting executed out of this appliance. And it also doesn't matter what you execute in. It's only interesting to bypass the specific filter to show the people that you could execute any specific context out of the application. So the bug which is inside of the exception handling is mostly critical, because every time when you're producing an exception, you need to pass the content which is coming out of the specific exception. So if you don't do that, it will result in the execution of the context when, for example, when you say there is an error, but you display it plain for you, like example, you saw it earlier on the exception handling on the Barracuda when it has parsed my first request. So in this scenario, it has not been parsed, because when you're including this specific folder, it's also asking to you, it's also telling you what is the problem of the validation. So if, for example, he tell me double quotes are not allowed, I don't use double quotes. So if he say a slash is not allowed, I do not need to use this slash. So I need to exclude the specific chars to come a bit near this specific exception handling. So, yeah. So what I'm doing now is I implemented the frame, the onload alert. It's a cross-site scripting request, which is showing you later the context. But for me, it doesn't matter if inside, for me, example, alert, or I could also include a link which is executing any malware, or for example, a browser exploit. You only need to make it script code so it's getting executed out of. Yeah. What I'm trying to do now is, he told me you could not use these double quotes inside of the specific listing. So I excluded from my tag I have earlier used the specific double quotes to execute the context out of the specific listing. And yeah, that's very interesting to bypass these firewalls, because it's the only point where you have the possibility to, for example, attack the system. Because you are not interested in the specific customer as penetration tester, you are interested in the area which is a bit higher than for example, a user from the company, or for example, somebody who's working for them. If I'm attacking a company as penetration tester, I directly grab your appliance and attacking your real system, your backends and stuff like that, which is for me much more interesting because I get all if I'm inside. Yeah. Yeah. So only I have to say is I'm going to DEF CON, and we will have a talk about Skype exploitation. In the last year, I have done a lot of audits on Skype software and discovered a lot of vulnerabilities to the Skype security team. And this year, I'm going with John to the DEF CON to tell anybody how to exploit vulnerabilities inside Skype system. So because people daily talking about here's a vulnerability, there's a vulnerability, but nobody shows you how it's really working. So we created maps to make sure it's really working. That's all. Yeah.
Okay, in the remaining time, I'd like to do now is tell a few stories about some of the stuff that we did, because I kind of wanted to save the best for last. One of the things that I really wanted to do was, there was no 800 directory, a directory of 800 numbers. So in order for you to find an 800 number, the only way you can do that is to watch the ads on TV, newspapers, or whatever. And so what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to basically find, well, how do you find 800 numbers? There are a lot of independent companies that were giving away 800 directories. Well, I said to myself, I bet Washington, D.C. must have some really interesting 800 numbers. So I decided to scan every possible 800 number in Washington, D.C. It turns out that Washington, D.C. 800 prefixes is 800-424. That translates into 202 area code. And so all I did was I would just dial 800-424-0000 through 9999. I would skip at every 10 numbers, because if I got a recording that says, we're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed, this is a recording, 2022, then that means that that entire bank of 10 numbers is not valid. So therefore, why should I go through every 10 of those numbers? So I skip by 10s, 0010, 0020, 0030, 0040. And then until I find a working number in there. If I got a number that said, if I got a recording that says, we're sorry, the number you dialed is not a working number, okay, then that must mean that that entire bank of 10 numbers is a valid bank of numbers to use. So then we'd skip by ones. And so I found out that 800-424-9337 went into a very interesting individual. The person who I called at that number was extremely rude to me. why would anybody who would want you to call them and pay for your call and not want to talk to you? So therefore, that number had to be something special. So I wrote this down on my little special book, and then later on, a week or so later, I went back to that number, and I said, yeah, I should figure out where that number comes from. So I called the number again, and this time I said, hi, this is White Plains 4A Trunk Testing, AT&T Long Lines Division. Who have we reached? And the person says, you've reached the White House, sir. I says, this is a CIA crisis hotline you've called. Oh, sir, we'll get it fixed right away for you. We're having some translation difficulties. Thank you very much. And I hung up. Okay, and I wrote down White House CIA crisis hotline number. Now, a lot of times when phone freaks get together in parties and get-togethers and stuff like that, they like to trade information. So one particular phone freak had this really amazing conference number, and I just had to have it. So he says, well, what have you got to give away? I says, well, I can give you the CIA crisis hotline to the White House. And he said, you have what? And I said, yeah, I've got the CIA crisis hotline number to the White House. You want it? He says, yeah. Well, okay, after I found out the crisis hotline number, the next thing I had to do is I had to find out where the 202 area code it came in. It turns out that 202-456-9337 happened to have been the regular 10-digit number. So back in the day, they had auto-verify, which meant that if I could get directly into the 202 trunk line, if I dialed KP 052 2529337 start, I get click, plop, and then I get this scrambled noise. I flash it with 2600 and go beep, and it just clears away, and then I can hear the conversation on that number now. So I'm sitting there listening on the conversation on the number. And then I hear a conversation. It says, Olympus, please. And then the guy says, 1 moment, sir. And I swear, the guy that came on the line was President Nixon. I wrote down, Olympus, President Nixon. Okay, then I gave that to him as well. Okay, so what happened was, my friend Adam grabbed the phone from me and says, I know what I'm going to do. He called the number up, but I said, you really don't want to call that number directly. You really want to call that number and stack a few trunks. So what we did was we stacked a few trunks, so that would be harder for them to trace us back, because we knew that this was that this could really result in somebody getting into trouble. So Adam says, Olympus, please. 1 moment, sir. And Olympus came on the line and says, Olympus. He says, sir, we have a national crisis on our hands here in Los Angeles. Sir, we're out of toilet paper. And we hung up. Now, the idea was the fact that you could do that kind of thing back then. Now, this happened in I believe it was 1974, 1975. This was just during the time that Nixon was having all this Watergate stuff going on. And I think he got kicked out off soon afterwards. But that at least was what we did. A couple of other pranks that we did. It turns out that if you dial an old funky step-by-step exchange, these are the old Stroger switches you get. Well, Santa Barbara was operated and controlled not by Pacific Telephone Company, which is in California. It was operated by General Telephone Company, which is a totally different private telephone company. And they're also using 2600 signaling and trunking for the lines. So if you were to call into Santa Barbara, and if you pick the right, I had to dial into Santa Barbara with 2 phone lines exactly at the same time. And if you get it just right, maybe 1 in about 50 tries, you get this high-pitched scratch, and then all of a sudden it's just silent. And then you get burp, ring, comes in, hello, is Mabel there? You got the wrong number, lady. And then we hung up. Oh, this is interesting. We're intercepting calls going into Santa Barbara. So we started saying, why don't we do this? So we said, well, I know what we can do. So the next call that came in, it says, sir, this is the National Guard. Santa Barbara had a nuclear accident. We are not accepting calls into Santa Barbara right at the time. Please call back later. Okay. After a while, more and more calls started coming in. People started realizing, and word got spread around. Then the press started calling, and it started just getting pandemonium because we were on the primary selector group for all trunk lines going into Santa Barbara. We did this with 2 phone lines, okay, by just simply causing what is called a glare condition. A glare condition is where you got 2 trunks that are looking at each other and they're glaring. This guy's waiting for this guy to do something. This guy over here is waiting for this guy to do something. So they're just sitting there staring at each other, figuring out what they're going to do. And then, but in that process, calls coming in would show up as on hook, which meant that the numbers were not engaged. But all those calls that coming into that primary selector group wouldn't jump over to the next line, to jump over to the next line. It wouldn't work that way. It just jammed up the lines, and the calls just started piling in. And so there, we told them about the nuclear bomb hoax. And it wound up in the LA Times. And then there were some times, too, also, that when I was with Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak got these little radio transmitters for 160 megahertz. And if you go up to a drive-through like McDonald's, you drive into McDonald's, you see this clown Ronald McDonald or something on this little speaker, "May I take your order, please?" And that was over 160 megahertz frequency. So Steve was sitting in his car, way in the back there, watching these people drive in, and he'll say, "May I have your order, please?" And the lady would take the order, and they'll come back and they'll say, "Lady, you're too fat. I'm going to order a veggie burger for you instead."
I'm sorry, but we're running out of time.
Okay, well, anyway, I've ran out of time. If there's any questions you want to ask me afterwards, I think there's a break, right?
Yes, and now it's time for a 10-minute break.
Thank
you very much.
Yeah.
Before you go on a break, there's a little change in the schedule. After a break, there's going to be Gavel Mikołajczyk's presentation at 11:20. Thank you.